What's up? Peace, everybody. Finna do this video. Okay. You are who you think you are. But you are not who you are, if that make any sense. Because the first R is a verb. The second R is a noun, a proper noun. But at the same time, the real you is your ancestors. The pinnacle of who you really are is in the splendor and the pinnacle of your ancestors. That's exactly who you are. But if you don't know anything about your ancestors, that person is lying dormant inside of you. And the only way to become that person who you really are is to embrace your innate desires, your intrinsic desires that isn't influenced by anything outside of yourself. Now, the ancient Egyptians had a method of doing this. They called it education. And people like Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad, people such as Ashra Kwesi, they spoke of this. They called it educe, which means to bring out that what is within you, that which is lying dormant. You don't want to give a person, you don't want to project something on a person that isn't who they really are. Such as being a thug, being a criminal. Because the thugs are from India, the Vandals, the barbarians. We weren't that. Those are not our ancestors. Our ancestors are the architects, the builders, the people who terraformed, who engineered the entire world. We weren't the criminals. We actually the ones who established law and justice, jurisprudence, education, science, poetry, literature. Now, that person who was that person is that person. But that person exists right now. But that person isn't being educated properly. Meaning that person isn't being guided into bringing out their original self, their ancestors. And the only way to really become your ancestors is to practice and act like your ancestors. Your ancestors, I was talking about the so-called black Negroes. Your ancestors practice engineering, architecture, mathematics, science. These are the things that your ancestors practice. Now, if you want to become your ancestor, you must also practice these things. Your ancestors, our ancestors also practice warfare. We have the greatest military general of all time was a so-called black man. His name was Hannibal Barca from Carthage, which is North Africa, so-called Asia Minor, Western Europe, and the Americas. The Carthaginian Empire stretched all over the world, which became the Roman Empire. To get an idea of the how vast the Carthaginian Empire is, look at the Roman Empire and multiply it by 5. Now, we were conquerors, warriors, scholars, all things of great nobility, all things of great value and honor and valor. Now, if you want to become who your ancestors are, you have the desire to do it, which you know they shut you up. You know, you try to say, I want to be a mathematician. They're going to say you such and such a lame. They will give you negative reinforcement if you try to express your true desires and your interests. Because your inner self, your real self, or they say your higher self, is trying to accomplish those desires. But your lower self, which is the small r, you know, is guided by this world against who you really are. So it's a battle between your higher and lower self to determine who you really are. And your lower self is assisted by the entire society. The entire world is assisting the false self in becoming the image that you are not. So when you look at the word, you are who you are, you are who you think you are. The lower R negates the upper R. So the sentence can be really read, or it can be compiled. This is computer method coding. You have a compiler to translate the code to be understood, and our subconscious mind understands these codes. Now, it is retranslated. You are not who you are. So you are a false representation of yourself by not being who you really are. And for one, you're not even taught who you really are. Now you got a situation in which other cultures are trying to be who you are. Now there's only one America, one American. The original Aboriginal so-called black Negroes. Those are the original Americans, right? But everybody on earth want to be that. Because you came here and dropped off an anchor baby. You think you're an American. You want to discard your own nationality to become something that you're not. And then they have this falsification to a positive extent because they're doing it knowing who they are. They know they come from the dark ages, caves. They know they come from filth. And they want to disregard that and become who your ancestors really is. Now, they can attempt to become you. Now, you don't know who you really are, but they know who you are. But you are really your ancestors. And they are their ancestors. Now, they don't want to be their own ancestors. They want to be your ancestors. And by being your ancestors, they want to be you. And they want to practice the crafts and the practices of your ancestors by being scientists, engineers, artists, warriors. But they're not capable of achieving these feats. Their attempts always fail because the buildings that they build now looks obsolete and mediocre compared to the buildings that our ancestors built. Now, if you actually got into the field of engineering and architects and design, your designs will be greater. See, that's the fear, because they know you are who your ancestors are, and they know your ancestors are superior and in all aspects. And if your ancestors are superior in all aspects, then you are. If you was to embrace those philosophies and those principles and practices, this is the reason they don't want the so-called Negro, American Negro, to participate and practice science and engineering and warfare and literature, poetry, stuff like that, because they know our ancestors will come out and their prestige and prowess will dominate. Now, how do you become who you are? I talked about it earlier. You have to act like who you are. You gotta be into the science. You gotta be into the creation. You gotta think your own individual, unique thoughts that come from within, because we're not Simba in the Lion King. See, Simba was taught how to be Musafa by Musafa's buddy. We don't got nobody teaching us how to be Musafa. But Musafa is already within us. We just got to listen and practice these principles and these practices. We have a falsified identity. We taking on the identity of our oppressors' ancestors, which is not successful with us, because you successful in who you are. They're successful being criminals, thieves, deceptors, deceivers, things like that. But we were successful being just and righteous and perfect in everything we did. You know? So we got to become who we are. And you could do that right now, actually. Even though you might not have the name, the knowledge, but you have the DNA. You have the genetics. You are a splitting image of your ancestors, but you just don't know. So you think you're not, but you really are. You think you are the image that's being portrayed to us through the media, through the movies, the pimp, the criminal, the drug dealer, the uneducated fool, and that's not who we really are. We are the originators of education and literature, writing, navigation. Even to this day, I got proof right now that we are who we are. We are who our ancestors are. Now, our ancestors navigated the entire planet before the world knew the world was even a world. They had no knowledge of nothing. Our ancestors was on the high seas, navigating the entire. We had sea charts, star charts. Now, I'm gonna prove to you that we are who we are. A black woman is responsible for GPS. A black woman. I can't think of her name right now. And a black man by the name of Jesse Russell is responsible for cell phone technology, 4G, 3G, 5G, cell phone towers. The first person to put a CPU inside of a phone was Jesse Russell, and he's still alive. Now, how do you think he was capable of doing that? Because our ancestors had cell phones. We had wireless communication. Like Nikola Tesla say he was inspired to ensue wireless energy because he saw the Egyptians had wireless power. The pyramids and the obelisks were conductors and transmitters, or they were power plants, according to Tesla. So he looked at what our ancestors did, and maybe he was probably a distant descendant of one of them, for him to be able to tap into that and be successful at it. Now, the so-called Negro has to do that. They have to practice and act like their ancestors. We can't act like what the society want us to be, what they portray us as. We gotta become better, and we could become our ancestors, or we could become who we really are right now, without the knowledge of who we really are, just by acting like who we really are and embracing your inner desires and interest in higher learning, higher, like something better. Like, we all want something better. We want something luxurious, because our ancestors was living lavishly, luxuriously, because that's the reward for what your works is. That's the fruit of your labor. You put in the work, the hard work, you get to enjoy the splendors of your hard work. Well, how they got the society now, we do the hard work, yet another person is getting all the glory and living lavishly off of our efforts, because we don't know who we are, and we don't know what we deserve, and we don't know what's required, because we have been deceived and misguided into behaving in a way which we are not. But that's about it, though.